I was driving through the countryside to take a break from my busy life and work schedule. I've always been drawn to the countryside because it is serene and tranquil and away from the hustle and bustle of the city. As I sped along the winding roads, admiring the luxuriant vegetation and undulating hills, it struck me that it was getting late and I needed to find a place to stay the night. About 30 minutes later, I stumbled across an old hotel that seemed to have been deserted for a long time. To my surprise, however, I noticed a neon sign flashing in the window that read "Vacancy." I thought it would be an interesting experience to stay in such an odd place, so I decided to try it. As I entered the lobby, I was startled by the musty smell and the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The middle-aged receptionist appeared to be having trouble because of the serious expression on her face, registered me and gave me the key to my room. I felt strange as I climbed the creaky stairs to my floor. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, I could see the wallpaper peeling off the walls and the stained, worn carpet. I took a moment to think before I opened the door to my room, which was slightly ajar. The room was so cold I shivered as I moved over to the window to try and close it. At that moment I noticed a man staring up at me from the street below. He was dressed in outmoded attire and had a menacing expression on his face. I quickly shut the window and locked it after feeling a wave of fear wash over me. In an effort to unwind, I turned on the television, but all I saw was static. When I first heard strange tapping and scratching noises coming from the walls, I was lying on the bed. I couldn't stay in my room for much longer, but I was too afraid to leave. The scratching and tapping continued, growing louder and more pronounced, giving me the impression that something was moving within the walls. On the nightstand next to me, a tiny camera was then brought into view. I had no idea who had placed it there, how long it had been there, or how it had gotten there. As panic began to set in, I quickly got up to leave the room. But as soon as I got into the hallway, the receptionist was standing there, ready for me. She stood there expressionless and without utterance. She had an odd reaction when I told her about the camera in the hopes that she could explain it. She gave me a long, blank look before her eyes grew wide with fear. She screamed in fear, "This place is dangerous, you need to leave." Before I had a chance to ask her any questions, she quickly left and disappeared down the stairs. My fear level increased as I was left alone. As I was making my way back to my room, I heard a faint whisper. It was coming from the wall next to me, and it kept saying, "Get out." As I gathered my belongings and moved toward the entrance, I became aware of something that caused my heart to stop. The man from the street outside was now standing behind the front desk, grinning menacingly and staring straight at me. I quickly made a U-turn and left the hotel. When I noticed the hotel's flickering neon sign turning off, I turned around to go back to my car. As quickly as I could, I drove away from the hotel. A few days later, once I felt safe in my home, I finally had the courage to look up the hotel online. When I discovered the hotel had closed almost 2 years earlier and that the building had remained empty during that time, I was astounded. There were no known renters of rooms there. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I started having nightmares and kept checking behind me for any sign that the hotel manager would somehow find me. Until I saw a report a few weeks later. A small sect that held meetings and rituals there was discovered to have made the hotel its headquarters. Additionally, it was stated in the news that the sect was looking for unwitting subjects like me to film against their will. The news report included video of police officers storming the hotel with their weapons drawn and apprehending the cult members. I watched the video and felt a wave of relief. The receptionist most likely told me I had to leave with the intent of aiding me, I realized at that point. But it really didn't matter. Dark shadows danced across the windowpane as the rain pounded ferociously against it, adding to the eerie atmosphere in the hotel room. I had chosen this remote and abandoned inn on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town for solitude and a respite from the chaos of my everyday life. I had no idea that this decision would soon result in some of my worst fears. I had arrived late in the evening after a lengthy drive through twisting, rain-slicked roads. Only the key for room 237 had been given to me by the front desk agent. His anxious eyes flitted around as if he were trying to hide something terrible, giving him a strange appearance. My tired mind was just playing tricks on me, I told myself. As I entered the room, a shiver spread through my body. The room was sterile and outdated, with wallpaper that was faded and peeling at the edges covering the walls. The carpet beneath my feet felt damp and musty, sending a chill down my spine as I heard the floorboards of the hallway outside squeak. I explained it away by mentioning the age of the structure and my own increased unease. I tried to ignore my unease and feel comfortable. I unpacked my bags, turned on the tiny TV in the back of the room, and settled into the worn-out armchair next to the window. All other sounds appeared to be drowned out by the rain that fell non-stop. The beginning was announced by a soft knock on the door. Knock, knock. I jumped and glanced in the direction of the door as my heart began to beat rapidly. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the window, but no one was there. I believed it to be a joke, possibly told by a town's bad boy. I went back to my chair, deciding not to let it bother me. However, the knocking persisted and grew louder with every tap on the door. Knock, knock. I opened the door this time and prepared to confront the offender. Though it continued to rain, nobody was in the hallway, and it was completely dark. My irritation turned into unease as I shut the door, the chilly air becoming oppressive. It happened again shortly after that. Knock, knock. My nerves were jangled and I was restless with each intrusion. Those people, whoever they were playing a disturbing game. With my phone in hand, I tried calling the front desk, but no one answered. Panic gnawed at me as I considered my options. There was no way I could stay in this room, and there was also no way I would ever again open the door. I decided to shut myself inside. In an effort to silence the persistent knocker, I pushed the large dresser in front of the door. As I made my way back to my chair, the knocking stopped, and I heaved a sigh of relief. Maybe my actions scared the prankster away at last. The respite, however, was short-lived. Just as I was beginning to relax, it started again. Knock, knock. I was confined, and my thoughts were racing with fear and confusion. I couldn't make a call for help, and I was afraid to enter the hallway. The endless knocking tortured me as the hours dragged on. It seemed to go on forever. As dawn's first rays began to break through the window, the knocking finally stopped. I carefully unhooked the dresser from the door and limped into the hallway, feeling drained and worn out. I had to confront the perpetrator to put a stop to this madness. I knocked on the door of room 236, which was the one closest to me. The reply came from a disheveled man with bloodshot eyes that were filled with fear. He had experienced the same all-night suffering and constant knocking that I had. We shared stories while shaking as we realized we were not the only ones going through this nightmare. Together, we all collectively shook room 238's door. A woman answered, her face pale and drawn. She had gone through the same suffering, so the three of us huddled in the hallway looking for answers. Then, very unsettlingly, we heard a mocking laugh echoing down the hallway. As we followed the sound to room 237, which was at the other end of the corridor, our hearts were thumping. With trepidation, we pushed open the door, and the images we witnessed there would forever be etched in our minds. The front desk employee was standing in the center of the room, his eyes agitated and wild. He was holding a cheap knocking toy that was the size of a small toy. All through the night, he had been cruelly tormenting us while enjoying our terror and helplessness. The terrifying echo of his laughter throughout the room proved he was clearly insane. When we called the police, the clerk was fired, ending the evil plan. But the scars from that night would never get better. The hotel room, which was meant to be a quiet retreat, had changed into a terrifying place where the line between reality and a nightmare had vanished completely. As I drove away from the abandoned inn while it was still raining, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors and secrets it might have held. And I shivered as I realized that I would never return to room 237, that eerie place where the door had always been wrapped with knocking and where the nighttime silence had forewarned of unspeakable terrors just outside. For months, my wife and I had been anticipating our vacation. We were looking for a getaway from the chaos of our daily lives, and when we came across the Lakeview Inn online, it seemed like the ideal choice. The website advertised stunning views of the tranquil lake, opulent accommodations, and first-rate service. We had no idea that our ideal getaway would quickly turn into a nightmare. The first thing I noticed when we arrived at the Lakeview Inn was how different it appeared from the online images. The grand entrance had a dreary, abandoned vibe thanks to the faded paint that had once been vibrant. We dismissed it, however, speculating that perhaps the website's images were out of date. After all, our goal in coming here was to unwind, not to fuss over details. Things only got stranger once inside the hotel. Dark lighting and an eerie atmosphere filled the lobby. When we walked up to the front desk, the woman behind it had jet black hair and an unnaturally pale skin tone. She said in a monotone voice that chilled my spine, "Welcome to the Lakeview Inn. We've been waiting for you." My wife and I looked at each other uncomfortably, but we put it down to exhaustion from the long trip. In an effort to put the strange encounter behind us, we checked in and went to our room. Another disappointment was our room. A large, tastefully decorated suite with a balcony offering views of the lake was depicted in online photos. We discovered a small, dimly lit space with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell. We could hardly both fit on the tiny balcony. As we unpacked our bags, I muttered to my wife, "We must have booked the wrong room." However, the reservation I had looked up on my phone matched the room we were in. It appeared as though the hotel had knowingly misrepresented its lodgings. We observed that the other guests were equally eccentric as the staff that evening as we made our way to the hotel's dining area for dinner. They all had expressions of indifference and barely acknowledged our presence. They appeared to be in a trance, going through the motions of eating without expressing any joy. Both the food and the service were flavorless. We couldn't help but sense that there was something seriously wrong with this place. I attempted to start a conversation with a waiter who had a scar running down the side of his face, but he just stared at me and then left. We noticed strange noises coming from the hallway outside our room that evening as my wife and I were sleeping. There was a lot of whispering and hushed conversation going on, and every now and then we would catch a word or two that would make us shiver. My wife asked with a trembling voice, "What are they saying?" I answered, my heart pounding, "I don't know. But I'm getting the creeps from this place. We should go." We tried to leave, but as we did, we found that the doors were locked from the outside, keeping us confined to our room. When we realized we weren't the only ones in this eerie hotel, panic set in. When morning finally arrived, the sun was nowhere to be seen. When I attempted to call the front desk, no one picked up, and the curtains in our room remained tightly closed. Without a way to contact the outside world, we were isolated in this nightmare. Our situation deteriorated as the days turned into weeks. As time went on, we saw fewer and fewer of the other visitors, and when we did, their faces were gaunt and pale. They appeared to be losing their life, just as we were losing ours. The front desk employee showed up at our door one evening while my wife and I were huddling together in fear. Her eyes had completely lost all human emotion. Before slipping into the shadows, she muttered, "You shouldn't have come here." My wife and I decided to flee the scene with a renewed sense of purpose. After waiting until dusk, the unsettling whispers started to get louder and moved into the hallway. We broke open a window and left our room in some way. The gloomy hotel stood in stark contrast to the outside world. Just as the website had promised, the sun was shining brightly, and the lake was indeed lovely. But we understood that leaving the Lakeview Inn would not be without repercussions. We traveled to the closest town and spoke with the authorities, who were dubious about our account but agreed to look into it. They found no signs of the staff or other guests when they got to the hotel. The Lakeview Inn had appeared to vanish. My wife and I are still troubled by what happened at the Lakeview Inn. We don't know what sinister secrets that hotel harbored, but we will never forget the eerie staff, the strange guests, and the sensation of being entrapped in a nightmare that was all too real. Despite the fact that the Lakeview Inn is no longer there, we are still haunted by its horrors, a constant reminder that nothing is as it seems, especially when venturing into the unknown.